So today I'm going to introduce writing sprints, and it's something that has come to me after many, many years of writing. So I will start by putting up my hand and saying I haven't always been successful as an academic writer. I finished my PhD in 2022, and this was 8 years after I started the journey. So this was a PhD that should have taken 3 years. And by the end of those first 3 years, I had already my first top publication in the topmost journal in my field. So you couldn't go higher than that journal as far as top is concerned. I was on track to actually finish everything in 3 years. And I already had an academic job, the position that I have now, before I had finished the PhD, because everything looked like it was actually going to go well. But then life happened. So when I took the academic job, the first thing that happened months into the job is that I found out that I was pregnant. And then it felt like, you know what, we can do this. I'll go on maternity leave, I'll have a baby, and then I will come back. But nobody ever told me that motherhood changes everything. It's not just changing the time that you have in a day. It's changing you as a person in ways that you never expected. It's becoming responsible for another human being. And the level of responsibility is nothing like you have known before. So you name it, sleep deprivation, self-doubt, all these things were there. And the guilt, you have to actually live with the guilt of not being able to be the best person in your job and not being able to be the best person as a parent, and somehow having to make all those things work. Then at some moment, I think I did get my footing. I thought, we're going to get this done. And then the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden there wasn't that much access to childcare and help with kids. And so I had to ride it out through that wave. And then I reached a point where I was getting ready to quit because I had reasons that I'm never going to get the time to finish this PhD. So I was even considering at some point that maybe I should just go back to industry, because my background was in humanitarian operations. And I would have had success there if I had decided to do that. But then, I realized it's still something that I cared about. I had started, I had to finish, and so I had to find ways to survive. So writing sprints is a concept that is born out of this, and I'm going to unpack it as we go along. I just want to start with the message to everyone that, no one suddenly becomes successful. We all have to pave our path, and we all have to find our way. This is one of the ways that I have found, and maybe it will be useful to you, or maybe it will not. But I hope at least it gets you thinking about what sort of processes you can already start engaging with to put yourself in a position where you can actually do the best with the time that you have got available. I will also say a second thing, which I didn't say before. During this session, I'm actually going to ask you to write. So normally if I say to people, we have a writing session, come, let us write, maybe I get 3 or 4 people show up. And if I say, oh, we have a session, we're going to talk about these things, I get 20 plus people show up. So now I just try to sneak the writing in just to make people realize it's not that scary. So just be prepared that you're going to write. If you don't have a laptop, reach for a notebook, something. But today you are going to have to write. And we're going to see what you are going to be able to do with the few minutes that are available. So here's the thing about writing, which is really very weird. It's almost paradoxical. If you ask a person who is stressed about writing, why are you stressed? Most times it's because they're actually not writing. So if you're stressed about not finishing your PhD, you are stressed about the review paper that you have to turn in, you are stressed about even just getting started on a manuscript that you promised to deliver, I can almost bet at least 99% of the time you are stressed because you are not writing. If you want to get rid of stress associated with writing, then you actually have to write. And there are many reasons why we write, and I will get back to this later, but I think what's important for anyone who has any academic aspirations, or even if you want to be part of these big think tanks in government and you want to do impactful things with the knowledge that you've got, you are going to have to write. So it remains the most effective way to get the word out on a topic that you might be an expert on. So in order to be successful as an academic in this context, you have to write. The only way we climb the academic ladder is through writing. You will not publish if you are not writing, and you will be stressed if you are not writing. So once you have told yourself that I'm going to be an academic, then writing has to become a very central part of your existence. Now, I have some bits of good news for you that I hope you're going to be convinced of, at least by the end of this session. And I hope that over the coming months, I'm going to be hearing from you about how you're getting on with your writing and how you're suddenly moving that pipeline and pursuing all these different new ideas that you might have had just sitting in your head somewhere for quite a while. So why is it that we don't write? If we have said I'm subscribing to a life in academia and I love research and I love going out and gathering the data, why are we not writing? I will start again with myself, but I would like to hear from you, whether it's by chat or just unmuting your mic and speaking up. I think the biggest obstacle to my writing, now that I have the benefit of hindsight, was that I was a perfectionist. And being a perfectionist was not a problem until I had very limited in the time in the day to focus on my writing. So before I was a mom, in theory, I had 24 hours in a day. I could start working at 11 p.m. and finish at 4 a.m. and have great work produced in that time and go to sleep. But suddenly I couldn't sleep whenever I wanted. I couldn't get large chunks of sleep at any given time. And I also had many other things to manage that meant that theoretical 24 hours shrunk into almost nothing. But because I was a perfectionist, each time I promised, in this case with my PhD, my supervisors, that I'm going to send you something next week. Next week rolls in and that thing is not done. I tell myself, okay, I'm going to send them something next week instead, but I'm going to make it so good that the delay is going to be justified. And then the other week rolls in, and I've either not done it or it's not good enough. And then I'm starting to get anxious. So I'm like, okay, I cannot send this. Now it's been 2 weeks. Now I'm going to have to make it even better so that I justify a 3 or 4 week delay. And this went on and on and on until I reached a point where I realized, the time is ticking, the years are rolling by, and you are still nowhere near finishing. When actually I already had one chapter finished. It was published in this top journal. I had a second chapter also finished. It had been submitted to the same journal and they gave it a reject and resubmit, which is a very good thing for that journal, because they're saying we're interested in your work, but we think it will take more time than the typical revision cycle for you to actually address our comments. So this was already a brilliant chapter as well. And I just had to finish this one chapter. This is where I was losing all the time. So I kept telling myself, I just don't have time. I'm going to need a huge chunk of time. Otherwise, this doesn't get finished. So I became my own obstacle in the sense that it had to be perfect. But then I couldn't know if it was perfect because I was the only judge of the work that was in front of me. And I became very nervous about the criticism I would get as time went by. So I had to reach a point where I had to change this. So this, at least now, as I said, with the benefit of hindsight, is why I didn't write. So now I'm looking at an interesting comment. Don't write because it involves critical thinking. If you're here, you're already a critical thinker. Extensive reading, yes, very important. Actually, I know a lot of people who use reading as the excuse for not writing. They keep saying, I haven't read enough. They read thousands of papers and they still feel like they haven't read enough. So they must read enough first before they can write. Maximum concentration, that is true, but then that also depends. Sometimes I write in restaurants and cafes, and I actually can, within that atmosphere, get serious work done. It's better than sitting in my office. So there are different people, different needs, different situations that might require a specific thing. Takes a lot of time. Oh, yes, definitely. So what do we do if it takes a lot of time and we actually don't? If we don't actually have that time? Or is it really true that we don't have that time? That's a question. So thank you very much. Fear of being judged. What if I'm not a good writer at all? I think that's very familiar for all of us, isn't it? Especially when you start going through the academic publishing process. You write a paper that you think it's great and the reviewers come back and say it's all trash. You have to do it all over again. That can really be demoralizing. Fear of not being good enough. What is good enough? Now, that is a very good question. We're entering into philosophy now. It's just difficult to write. Okay, now here's some truth. Coding experiments, maybe. I'm not sure what putting words together. Class activities are preferred to writing. All right. I need to know more before writing. Yes, we all feel that sometimes, but you'll be surprised how much you already know. Sometimes life gets in the way. Yes, for sure. And actually, once you put things down, you actually lose your efficiency. I think I read something that says you can lose efficiency up to 75% if you lose consistent contact with your work. So if you put it down, when you come back again, you are set back 75%. If it was close to finishing, then you're almost as close at start, because you have to remember again what it was about, where you were, and all these things. Procrastination, and why do we procrastinate? Fear of starting a new chapter. It's almost like the fear of the unknown, isn't it?
What I meant was that, I'm using myself as an example. I have architectural background.
Yeah.
So I used to be in the studio 24/7.
Yeah.
So not really changing career precisely. I mean, from architecture to construction, and PhD, PhD to write, and architecture mostly. I have my PhD by the grace of God. Yeah. So I when I first changed to construction, it was a bit of challenge, with masters and everything. But now I've gotten over it. So I just remember my previous experience. I felt I should share it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. You actually then come across as a very versatile person, because I'm sure that the skills that you have picked up along the way are still very useful in terms of the toolkit that you have in front of you as a writer. Yes, Mercy?
I just said thank you.
Oh, okay, you're most welcome. So personally, my background was actually applied mathematics. My first degree was an applied mathematics degree, and now I've actually become a hardcore qualitative researcher. I can recognize now the symbols that are used in mathematics. I can read a formula, but I couldn't solve a mathematical problem to save my life, But still, I think, especially if I would be very specific about the benefit that I had from having a mathematical degree, I'm very good at spotting logical flaws in arguments. And I've also become very good at constructing logical arguments. So it's rare that I submit a paper and reviewers say, oh, but you are logically incoherent. This is something that I have on lockdown, and it's something that I was able to develop as a result of having the mathematical background. So I find that a lot of us, if we are in academia now or considering academia, we would have come from other backgrounds, because we probably didn't know about academia for a long time, or we thought it wasn't for us until something changed. And I see a lot of people who tend to be very apologetic about that. Or, it's just that in a former life, I was this engineering person and now I have to do supply chains. No, it's nothing to apologize for. It's actually something to be proud of. And it's something for you to say, what are the skills that I can bring along with me here that are going to give me an advantage? So don't be dismissive of whatever you have got in your background, because all of it is going to be necessary in academia. We talk about academia as though it was science, which it is, but it's also partly art. It's also partly about very creative ways of thinking and looking at the world. And no background is wasted, as far as I'm concerned, if you make a switch over into academia, regardless of what you did in a former life. Ritika, operational research. Okay, now I understand the comment. How do you merge? So there are quite some comments about the things about how we actually do the writing, or how we even get started. Quite a few comments about starting, sitting to actually get the point in place. Well, you see that today is your day, because you are going to do that within this session. And I would like to hear how it actually went. So a lot of comments about finding it hard to start. So let's see how we can start, because that's one of the things that we are going to try to do today. trying to make it perfect. Yes, there's somebody who lives with perfectionism as a condition that will never go away. I can relate to this, but there are also ways around it. Like once you understand it will never be perfect, and that you will be the only person with the full view of what your perfect paper would have been. That also means people will miss a lot of things that you don't like about the paper. So once I realized that I am the only person who actually has the full picture, I became comfortable with saying, this is good enough, you know. And I know this lady who always says, once your paper is 80% ready, just submit it, because you have to leave 20% for the reviewers to actually impose their views and for you to integrate those views into your paper. So don't submit the perfect paper to a journal, because that's one of the surest ways to sabotage yourself. If they come back unhappy, you are also unhappy because it was the perfect paper, but that's not actually how it works. So at least if you tell yourself, I've left them 20% to change things, and it comes back with the comments, you're probably more receptive of those comments than when you had told yourself it was the perfect paper. So the goal is never to get it perfect, it's to get it good enough so that peers can look at it, criticize it in constructive ways that are going to then eventually help you to submit. So we've looked at all these reasons for not writing, and then the next question becomes, are they valid reasons or are they excuses? So this is something that I'm just going to ask you to reflect on. If you say, I'm finding it difficult to start, is it really a valid reason, or is it an excuse? If you have started several things before and finished them, how did you start them? And why does starting remain a problem then, if you've already done it a few times? So I will leave you with that thought, and then I will move on to one of the things that we have to understand about why we get stuck in terms of writing. I think until something like, I would say 6 years ago or so, maybe 8, I don't know, I used to think that writing is actually me expressing my thoughts. So I have some things that I have thought of, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and express those thoughts, put them in writing to make them accessible to other people. But our brains are just a cluttered mess. You know, if I would look at the things that we have to juggle throughout life, I'm juggling a relationship right now, I'm juggling parenthood, I'm juggling my job and admin, I'm juggling relationships with friends, managing a household. All those things are in the same space that I actually also have to think about my academic writing, right? And if I would zoom in on just the part where I have to do science, it's a tangled mess itself. There are a lot of competing concepts, there are a lot of competing ideas, there are a lot of things that I would like to find in the literature that aren't already there, and I'm not sure, can I make the leap or not? So most times when we are saying we are stuck, we cannot write, it's because the reality of writing is that we have a tangled mess that we have to sort through, and we actually would not be able to sort through this mess just by thinking, just by keeping it in our brain. So when we write, it's actually a way of pulling out that tangled mess, putting it in a space where we can pin it down, and then we can start to interrogate it and sort through it. So I normally say writing is like just taking that tangled mess out of your head and putting it in a place where you can see it. And then once it's in a place where you can see it, the job is to start sorting through it until you have the clarity of thought. So I maintain this, writing is thinking. So we usually make the mistake, first and foremost, that we think I must write, I must think, and when I have thought, I will write. But there's no way for you to sort through the clutter in your brain by leaving it in your brain, because it's competing for space with other things, you know. But if you would write something and you leave it there, sometimes it's also even helpful for those of us who get anxious and can't sleep when we haven't solved something. Just putting something in writing, whatever it is, however messy it is, you get it out there. You have a feeling, okay, now I have it there, it's fixed. And my brain doesn't need to remember it because it's there. I can come back and I can look at it in the morning. But at least for now, I can allow myself rest. I can regenerate my cluttered brain so that I can come back and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. So when you realize this, you will also become comfortable with having dozens and dozens and dozens of drafts for even just a mere introduction. So I have a format now where I write the first draft of my introduction in 25 minutes, but I'm probably going to look over that introduction more than 15 times before it actually gets submitted. Because then over time, you have to pick the right words, you have to put your arguments in the right order, you have to become very specific about what the contribution is. And all of that is a part of the thinking process. And sometimes it will be informed by, for people who work with data, what you actually find in your results. So I might start off with an idea that this will be my contribution based on my understanding of the problem. But when I actually start going into the data and I let the data speak, I will see things that will make me think, okay, so that's not the contribution, or I was asking the wrong question altogether. So I will have to go back and I will have to change those things. So it's a very normal part of the process that the first draft that you generate is not going to be the perfect draft. So I now even tell students, don't wait until towards the deadline to produce that draft, because that's probably your shitty first draft that the teacher will see had potential but didn't reach that potential, because this is an initial overview of your thoughts. They're not sorted through. You haven't even had clarity yourself on what the problem is or what you're proposing. And that's where those things become very important. I'm going to play this video for you that explains why we should write. So somebody made the comment that it involves critical thinking and therefore it's hard. But actually, as I said, if you see the two as intertwined, then you will start to have an easier time with writing, because you will be like, okay, I need to start thinking critically. So what should I do? I have to start writing. So let's listen to this clip, because he puts it in the best possible way. And please let me know if you...
Because what's happened now, it's very hard to teach people to write because it's unbelievably time intensive. And like writing, marking a good essay, that's really easy. Check A. You did everything right. Marking a bad essay? Oh my God. The words are wrong, the phrases are wrong, the sentences are wrong, they're not ordered right in the paragraphs aren't coherent, and the whole thing makes no sense. So, trying to tell the person what they did wrong, it's like, well, you did everything wrong. Everything about this essay is wrong. Well, that's not helpful either. You have to find the few little things they did half right, and you have to teach them what they did wrong. It's really expensive. And so what I did with this rubric was try to address that from the production side instead of the grading side. But the best thing you can do is teach people to write, because there's no difference between that and thinking. And one of the things that just blows me away about universities is that no one ever tells students why they should write something. It's like, well, you have to do this assignment. Well, why are you writing? Well, you need the grade. It's like, no. You need to learn to think, because thinking makes you act effectively in the world. Thinking makes you win the battles you undertake, and those could be battles for good things. If you can think and speak and write, you are absolutely deadly. Nothing can get in your way. So that's why you learn to write. It's like, and I can't believe that people aren't just told that. It's like, it's the most powerful weapon you can possibly provide someone with. And I mean, I know lots of people who've been staggeringly successful and watched them throughout my life. I mean, those people, you don't want to have an argument with them. They'll just slash you into pieces. And not in a malevolent way. It's like, if you're going to make your point and they're going to make their point, you better have your points organized, because otherwise you are going to look like and be an absolute idiot. You are not going to get anywhere. And if you can formulate your arguments coherently and make a presentation, if you can speak to people, if you can lay out a proposal, God, people give you money, they give you opportunities, you have influence. That's what you're at university for. And so that's what you do. Is you're in English, right? And yeah, in languages anyways. It's like, yeah, teach people to be articulate, because that's the most dangerous thing you can possibly be. So, and that's motivating if people know that. It's like, well, why are you learning to write? Because here's your sword, here's your M16, right? Here's your bulletproof vest. Like, you learn how to use them. But it's an endless mystery to me why that isn't made self-evident.
I will just leave it here. I think so. The first point that I really would like you to take away out of this entire session is that writing and thinking go together. It's a very intricate, intertwined process that if you can begin to engage with, that's the only way you can also begin to see your critical thinking skills actually take off. So if you have actually done this, one of the things that I say to my students, and I also look for it for myself in my own research, when you start writing an essay, start writing an academic paper, whatever it is you're writing, normally we will start with a working hypothesis, right? So in some sciences, they will be most explicit about what that hypothesis is, and in some others, it's probably your own intuition, right? So the more qualitative researchers will start with some kind of instinct, not really a clearly specified hypothesis. And if you go through the process in earnest and you actually do the thinking through the writing, you might find that the conclusions also surprise even you. So you will look at it and you will think, oh, that's not actually what I expected I would find. But it's not only that, you will also find that you have the expectations for why you find what you find. You will be like, now it makes sense. You will have a lot of aha moments because you have actually integrated these two things that belong together. So if you want to be an academic, as I have said, you want to be serious or taken seriously in whatever you do, then writing is your sword, because that is how you become a critical thinker. That's how you learn to express yourself. So he starts this video by saying, for example, the sentences are wrong, the phrases are wrong. It's down to even the words that you pick in terms of the arguments that you make. And this is not something that will come from you sitting and thinking about the problem. It will come from you putting the problem out and then starting to interrogate it over time. That's how we write. So this is the first reason why writing is so important. And this is something that we should take with us. We should make writing our friend. It's not the enemy. It's actually the friend that helps us to hone those skills that are necessary for whatever fields we are in and whatever academic ambitions that we have, or whatever we see as the end goal in terms of the difference that we can make in the world. And we all have a very short time, so we might as well just try to do it sooner rather than later.
Maybe that's one way of thinking about it.
So where do we start? Because they have been, I think the bulk of the comments that we had earlier were about people saying, oh, it's really difficult, where do I start? So I like to talk about the principles of writing in terms of two things, and with academic sprint, with the writing sprint in particular. One thing that we like to argue about is time. And so there are some things that we have to accept about time in order to be able to do the best with the time that we have got. If you are an academic, you're probably already an adult, and you probably already have a lot of responsibilities, life and work and everything in between. So at this point, there's no chunk of time that's going to fall from the sky and say, here I am, use me to write whatever you want. You will probably never get a full day in your life where you have nothing else to do except write. So if you are not going to get this chunk of time anytime soon, how are you going to be productive? One thing that I have come to know is that time feeds what you allow. So it's not the other way around. You know, if you are going to prepare your dinner in 30 minutes, that's what you allow, that's what it's going to take. If you're going to prepare your dinner in 5 hours, that's what it will take. It's the same with preparing for classes, everything. So if you are a perfectionist like I am, there are certain things now that I say I'm going to leave until the last minute, because then I'm going to do them in the time available, right? So if, for example, I have to deliver a module that I already delivered last year, and I just have to check the slides, instead of doing this in the summer term, like 8 weeks before teaching start, I'm going to do it the week before teaching start, because then I'm going to dedicate the time that I have in that week to doing it. Whereas if I would start 8 weeks earlier, I might spend the whole 8 weeks actually going through updating the content. So you have to be smart about what time you allow for different things, and you're going to have different processes for making those types of decisions. Something that I do now, and maybe there'll be an opportunity in the future to present it, I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about it, but it's accepting that whenever I write a paper, there will be certain parts of the paper where the process is efficient, right? So like my introduction, the first draft that I just need to get started with the paper, I will do in 25 minutes. That's the time that I allow, that's the time that it takes. And yes, I will go back to it multiple times. Ultimately, I'll probably spend more than 10% of the total writing time on the introduction, but that first draft is just 25 minutes. My method section, as long as I'm doing qualitative case studies, now also has a standard format and structure. I justify why I use these methods. I also present the cases and how I did the sampling logic and all of that. But now I can also say within a couple of hours, maybe 4, I can write up my method section. But the bulk of my work when it comes to research is actually going through the data. So these are the processes that I call having friction. There's friction because I'm not sure what is in the data. I'm not sure what's going to be important. I'm not sure what the plot is going to be that's actually going to hit the top publication. So I accept friction in the analysis process because I have less control over what's going to happen there. But everything else that I can do efficiently, I can do efficiently and I can have control over. So in one of the papers that I recently got accepted as an example, I think the analysis time for the data on and off and with writing in between was something like 11 months. So that was the bulk of the time spent on this paper. And then the actual writing, maybe 4 months, just getting that first draft out. So you have to know where can I be very efficient and strategic when it comes to how I allocate time, and where can I accept that maybe here I have to accept that this is what the time will allow. And then finally, the good news, and this is very, very good news, and I didn't believe it until it actually happened to me, is that you need just 15 to 30 minutes of writing in a 5-day working week to get work out. So if you started each day and you said, I'm going to spend the first 30 minutes before I talk to anyone working on that manuscript, you could actually get it out in 3 or 4 months to a journal publisher. And there's a book related to this. It's the one that I cite in the beginning by Wendy Belcher, Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. You may not need the whole book, but even just by reading the first chapter, I think she hits some right notes in terms of the things we need in terms of attitude. So because we will never get this large chunk of time, then we actually have to be very consistent with the limited time that we have got. You know, if you're working in the office every day, maybe your colleagues need to know that between 9 and 10, they shouldn't come and bother you. Or maybe you are waking up in the morning before everyone else starts the day in the household, and you put in those 30 minutes and you get it out of the way, but you actually can't do it. So consistency is very important, and being very efficient in terms of your entire processes in writing, identifying those things that you can do more quickly can be very helpful. So the first principle is that time is not an excuse, because even with just 15 minutes a day, you can be a very productive person. Maybe not necessarily prolific. I have met some prolific writers, and I hope we can also hear from them soon. I'm not prolific, but I'm actually quite effective in the sense that most of the things I send out will not get rejected, or at least they will survive the editor's desk. So you will get very good feedback that you are able to use in order to improve the manuscript. So you might also have to make this choice. Am I going to be a prolific writer that gets a lot of things out? Or am I going to be the consistent writer that produces good quality work, but really in small drips over time? Once you make these choices, you are in a good position to actually be able to start to see some progress in your own writing. Now, the second set of principles relates to the writing itself. So we have already hammered in the point that writing is thinking. And even if you read a lot of things, you will not actually start really thinking until you start the writing. So don't fall into the trap of reading enough, because there's no such thing. But actually try to start with what you have, because once you start writing, you might realize where the real gaps are, and your searches in terms of reading become more targeted. Also be aware you'll write a lot of shitty drafts. Because there's a lot to disentangle, right? So as I already showed, it's a complicated process where you are even interrogating your own thinking, you're critiquing yourself. So there will be multiple versions before you get to the ultimate one that is good enough. But then next to this, I think writing, especially at least for me as a woman and having been in the Swan platform and being in other women's writing groups, I find writing to be a very social thing. So the people who write in a group, who talk to other people about what they write, who are able to articulate what sort of challenges they're facing and so on, are the people who actually do better as writers. It could be that the theory that you're looking for as someone working in the built environment is in the hands of your friend who's a political scientist. So you tell them, I'm having this problem, I'm just getting stuck, I can't find the right thing. And the political scientist says, it sounds like you're talking about this theory. Just go and have a look and you might find that it is useful. So speaking to others is actually a way of also making those leaps in terms of how you are thinking about a problem and about the different types of things that you can bring in. But also sometimes it helps you to clarify your own thinking, because the person can ask questions that allow you to see where you're getting stuck or maybe what next steps you might have to take. And we also like to say, I don't have time, I have to write, I have to lock myself away. But I have found that socializing also is a very important part, because it sometimes frees up your mind. It gives you that state of mind where you can actually take some distance and the background processes in your brain can do the necessary work for you to come back to your work and actually start making the next steps. So when I was doing my PhD, for example, I had a coffee buddy every day without fail. If we were both on campus, we were going to have a coffee. And on the worst times, maybe we were having 2-3 coffees in a day. And it felt like wasting time, but actually it was a good way of taking distance and letting the brain work before I could get to the writing. So I found, at least personally, that those 3 things go together and they're very helpful for the academic process. So don't write so much in isolation, but just actually do engage with people. And of course, I will have to say people you trust, because we know they're shady people in academia. You might present one idea, the next thing it's out in the streets before you've actually gotten to writing it or crafting it in the way that you like. So you need a good balance between being protective and careful, but also being able to tap into the knowledge and networks that you have got. So now we know that, we will have to write and we will always have a limited amount of time. So what can we actually do? So the writing sprint is something that I designed, trying to work with this framework. For 15 to 30 minutes, I'm going to be able to write something that takes me somewhere. And ultimately, it led me to the first draft of an introduction. So now I will have to also be clear that for me to be able to write a first draft of an introduction, I've had to have a specific template.